Hey guys, this is me again. I have another loom coming your way. And this is going to be, I'm going to try to make this prettier. Perfect. All right, we're going to be looking, we just finished up with the impact of China. I hope you saw there's a minimal impact in China. Portugal was able to have Macau as an enclave. Canton was a British enclave. And I hope you noticed the Qing dynasty worked to limit really any real diffusion from the West, right? And I've already talked about how that's going to have a long term impact. Well, Japan's going to have even less of an impact. And there's a couple things I want to share with you. All right. So the context. All right. So again, I don't know how significant we need to memorize this stuff, but this is the context. India was the Mughal Empire. Japan is called Tokugawa Shogunate. Okay. And as you look at the assignment, either via here or on the Google Doc, and I have a map here I put in purposely, I want to point out by the 1540s, right before the Europeans really impact Japan or try to impact, the Tokugawa Shogunate becomes a feudal system. Typically in feudalism, we know that the nobles divide and not unite, but the Tokugawa shogunate is going to use military and Shinto to create a united Japan. With all those words, whatever, I want us to talk about this. All right. Shinto. Shinto is the indigenous or native religion of Japan. Okay. Shinto, similar to Confucianism, is going to determine the paradigm of Japan. Remember, Confucianism defined the paradigm of China. Shinto is really I'm going to overemphasize it, determine the paradigm of Japan. Now, in my conversation, I want to point out is I'm going to overstate the importance of Shinto. I do know that. And I'm going to limit our conversation to Shinto to 1/1000th of what Shinto is. So if you take world religions and you think you know Shinto, because what I said, you know a speck of a larger part, just like you did with Confucianism. Now, with those words, according to Shinto, at this moment, the emperor was God. So what the shogun or military leader did, he ruled in the name of the living emperor. And that living emperor, though has no real power because of the shogunate, but that emperor is going to be identified as God. According to Shinto, the emperor is God. So therefore, if the shogun is ruling in his name, can the Japanese people challenge the shogun? I hope you understand, no. If the Japanese are challenging the shogunate, then they're challenging God. So therefore, they're challenging God. If we use Western terminology, they would be going to hell. Now, Shinto doesn't really believe in hell, but I think you get the point. Shinto is being used to unite Japan in the shogunate. And the shogunate is the feudal system of Japan. I hope you know this. And I like this map. This map is a really good illustration of feudal Japan. This is developing of the Tokugawa. It's kind of like the Holy Roman Empire. The difference is the Holy Roman Empire was less united because they didn't have the Shinto element. And we'll talk more about that later. But I hope everybody understands that. So once again, the religion of Shinto identified the emperor as God, and that is what's going to unite Japan. In a second, you're going to see why that's important. All right. The Westerners were initially welcomed because what? The Japanese daimyo or nobles, they're like, dude, you got cool stuff. You got gunpowder. Whoa. You got clocks. Whoa. Stuff that Japan had never seen before. And they were like, oh, this is cool. Well, that's going to be short-lived. Now, a little side note, if you did your power mapping real well, you may even talk about how the daimyo or nobles copied European-style castles. And if you ever visit Japan, from what I understand, you can visit some of those cool castles. That's one of my bucket lists. I kind of want to go. I want to see what's cool there. But with that said, I want to see the initial Westerners were welcomed. The Westerners were really excited. They've never even heard of Japan. Now they're there and they're trading these goods and they're trying to figure out what's good there. Well, we already know what did the missionaries bring with them. The Portuguese brought Catholic missionaries, and the Catholic missionaries wanted to say Jesus is God, right? So let's review. If you're the shogunate using Shinto to rule, and you have an outsider that comes up and says, Jesus is God, that seems to contradict the emperor's God, what's going to happen to the emperor's power or the shogun's power? Of course, it's going to collapse. So what quickly happens? Japan hates the Europeans. They shut the Europeans out. They say sayonara, literally that's their word. See you later, alligator. And they shut down. Almost everyone except for the Dutch, and we're going to say something about the Dutch in a hot second. And in 1635, Japan passes the shogunate introduces this act of seclusion of 1635 that basically says Japan is completely isolated from the rest of the world. Not only are they going to kick the Westerners out, but if any Japanese individual escapes Japan and tries to return, they will be immediately burned. This was the idea that the outside world's evil. Japan is perfect. They called themselves a middle kingdom. They believed the world revolved around them. That's another story. But in the end, they're going to shut it. Now, I know I'm going through this quick. I hope you see the most important reason they seclude themselves is Catholicism. It challenged their political stability. The emperor says, heck no, the emperor's God. That's what we're going to stick with. And they pass this act of seclusion. They keep foreigners out, but they also keep Japanese people in. And for the most part, Japan will fall off the map. No one will remember Japan until the 1850s. And we'll talk about that later. Now, really quickly, the Dutch were allowed in Nagasaki for a short period of time because we're going to find out in the next unit. The Dutch, they didn't want to spread their religion. They believe in this thing called predestination. So since God had already chosen who's going to go to heaven and hell, does it even matter? So the Dutch were not evangelists. They were not looking to convert the Japanese. And because of that, the shogunate allowed them to have Nagasaki for about 5 more years. But that's another story. If you don't remember that detail, it ain't a thing. What I do need you to know is Japan initially is welcoming the foreigners. Catholicism challenges the political stability. Therefore, Japan says, heck no, we won't go. And they exclude themselves from the rest of the world with the act of seclusion of 1635. I hope that makes sense. This is a short little video. I hope you are cool with that.